Children's literature is a life-changing tool that can shape the world and perspectives around us. How do we create the conditions and mindsets that help people fall in love with reading? Our work as teachers is rooted in guiding and opening doors. We don't just encourage reading, we nurture it. We create spaces where stories feel accessible and alive. And in that work, we know we have an opportunity to model what reading looks like ourselves, to share what moves us, to talk about the stories that challenge us, comfort us, or change us. How do we spark that flame, though? We do it through building authenticity and modeling those relationships to our students. And when we cultivate a genuine space and invest in our interests, we make it visible. And that visibility invites others in. Big, by Vashti Harrison, shows how we can all feel the power and weight that words hold, but conversely, how we are not defined by them.
One of my favorite children's books to share is The Smallest Girl in the Smallest Grade by Justin Roberts. And what I love about this book is that it teaches children that it doesn't matter how little you are, you can stand up for what is right. Children's books may be short in length, but they're layered and complex, and they ask readers to critically think.
I think most of us would agree that reading matters, right? But in a world of constant screens, it's easy to underestimate the power of books. To demonstrate, we think it's helpful to look at the world our youngest readers are growing up in. Screens are a part of childhood now, right? But when you look at how that time is spent, you can see why engagement with stories takes intention. For children ages 0 to 8, over 86% of their daily screen time is spent viewing videos, TV, and gaming. While that isn't inherently bad, that amount of screen time influences poor sleep habits, decreased self-confidence, limited attention spans, and physical health effects if not kept at safe levels.
And researchers at Boston University found that when we read to children, something remarkable is happening in their brains. As they listen to stories, areas linked to language development and emotional intelligence become highly active, especially in this area called the right temporal parietal junction. Here's why that matters. The study showed this region of the brain lights up when children are read to, but not when they're on screens. So the same parts of the brain that engage during a shared reading overlap with the ones that children use to understand people, their thoughts and feelings and perspectives. So when children are reading, they're not only developing vocabulary and print awareness, but they're also becoming more empathetic people.
And children's books are often dismissed as simple, but they offer compelling ways to understand fundamental aspects of life, presenting heavy topics in digestible forms, while also remaining both visually and intellectually demanding through their art, placement, and style. When we look at the world around them and how to see themselves as a part of it, when we read, we step into those worlds and learn about other cultures and lives we may never otherwise encounter.
Literacy scholar Rudine Sims Bishop reminds us what stories make possible. She says that books are like mirrors that help us see ourselves, and they're windows that open our view to other people's lives, and doors that allow us to step into new worlds from a different perspective. When a teacher reads aloud, it's not just about delivering a story. It creates this experience that builds trust and belonging, where students feel like they can take risks and ask questions and stay engaged. And this is not separate from learning how to read, it supports it. The science of reading shows us that reading skills must be explicitly taught, but those skills are strengthened through these rich experiences with books.
And that power matters more now than ever. In a time of book banning and uncertainty, teaching people to lean into stories is something worth protecting. Access to books and reading expands us. They stretch our understanding beyond the boundaries of our own experience, and empathy begins in practicing taking perspective. When we read about lives different from our own, different cultures, identities, struggles, and joys, we practice seeing the world through someone else's eyes. And that practice is not passive, it's transformative. It's a catalyst for change.
And books also do something equally powerful. They affirm us. When we see our lives reflected in books, we feel seen and valued. And when we encounter other lives different from our own, we learn to value others too.
We see this as work tied to the public good. When we help future teachers find joy and reconnect with reading, it travels into classrooms, communities, and lives. We want to show how changing the game of reading can help make BGSU and the world beyond it a more connected and human-centered place.
So I want to pause for a moment and ask you guys a question. Can you remember a time when someone read aloud to you as a child? For me, it was teachers reading aloud after recess. And I still remember how excited I got when Charlie found that last golden ticket in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but also how sad I was for Wilbur at the end of Charlotte's Web.
Oh, I sobbed for Wilbur.
It's incredible, though, how those moments can stay with us from so many years ago, right? It's crazy. That's how powerful it is to be read to. It stays with you. When I asked my pre-service teachers the same question, some of them are so excited they can't wait to share their favorite books. It showed me how important it is to help future teachers rediscover why stories matter so that they can take those experiences into their classrooms.
Children learn to love reading by watching the adults around them. Reading aloud is not just something teachers do, it's a part of who they are as educators. I remember my 9th grade teacher reading aloud during their home periods, and I did that for my own students in my classrooms. The excitement and anticipation of the books made them keep coming back for more, especially when they didn't have to during that period. I also had a teacher who did that same thing in middle school when I didn't feel like I fit in during lunch periods. I moved schools a lot, and the comfort of books and the spaces that held them were my home. Now, my home is here in the Curriculum Resource Center. It's not just a space on campus for future teachers, not just a collection of books, but it's a working space to engage with literacy and teaching aids that they will one day use with their own students.
I spent 20 years in an elementary school before moving here to higher education. And my favorite time of the day was always when I got to read aloud with children and see how they connected with books. I learned that how I talked about books mattered. When I treated reading as something joyful and meaningful, my students did too. So now here, I'm a professor in the Inclusive Early Childhood Program, and I prepare future teachers with those children in mind, because I know that once they step into their own classroom, they're gonna leave lasting impressions on children for years to come.
If we want something different for children, we need to start with how we prepare pre-service teachers. And one way to do this is through experiences that help them reconnect with reading as meaningful work themselves. One example is through a book tasting.
So imagine walking into a library that's been transformed into a coffee shop. The smell of coffee and baked goods fills the air, and you can hear soft music playing. And on tables, there are hundreds of children's books just waiting to be picked up. Nicole and I turn our library each year, each semester, into a cafe-style book tasting that we call Starbooks. And we don't give students an assignment, they're just simply invited to read.
And everyone immersed themselves in the picture books, and something surprising happened. The room was silent, aside from the crinkling of pages turning, the kind of quiet you only get when people are genuinely reading. As students read, they listed favorite titles on a menu and described what they loved about each book, while also making connections to their standards or content inherently. And without realizing it, they were doing the work of great teachers, choosing books, imagining classrooms, and thinking about how those stories create connection. They see that teaching reading isn't just about delivering curriculum, it's about inviting children into a lifelong relationship with stories, ideas, and connection with one another.
Then after the book tasting, we ask our students to reflect. And what stood out to us wasn't just that they discovered these new books, but they began to see themselves as teachers, and teachers who could create spaces like this. And the best part is when we run into former students who tell us that they're doing book tastings in their own classrooms.
And it raises a bigger question for all of us. If a small shift in time, access, and environment can change how future teachers might think and feel about reading, what might happen if we designed and interacted with more spaces like this in our schools, our libraries, and our communities? Changing the game of reading doesn't mean just returning to books. In returning to those spaces, they can rediscover why it matters in those spaces too.
So what does this actually look like? It's future teachers gathered around tables, deciding what picture book should win the best one of the year for the Caldecott Award. And it's designing text sets that connect stories to science and social studies and math. And it's practicing those read-alouds until they make that story come to life.
It's curating a quality selection of literature in collaboration with both professors and students that reflect the voices and instructional possibilities to ensure we think critically about how these texts can model both strong reading and writing skills to cultivate that inclusive classroom and cultivate empathy. These opportunities show more than just literature, as more than a resource or a space, but it creates that safe space where we can experiment with them before getting out into the classroom with students.
So we began by sharing a few picture books because we know that if we're going to inspire this love of reading, it makes time. We need to make the time for it, right? The smallest girl in the smallest grade and big are just examples of books that teach children that they have a voice and they can make a difference.
As educators and adults, our responsibilities is not to teach or to lead, but to notice, to value and inspire. And reading does not have to look one specific way, right? And all readings count. And each avenue matters. Use your own interests to start to explore topics that excite you. And if you're unsure, maybe you should pick up a picture book. But keep finding ways to stay connected to stories. And reading children's literature is an easy way to unplug and engage with the magic that they provide.
They teach us to remember, and they take us back to our earliest truths we learned before we doubted ourselves. And in their pages, we're reminded not only of who we were, but who we can still become. Brave and bold and kind and creative and resilient.
And perhaps most importantly, picture books remind us that growth is lifelong. The lessons we return to in their pages are not just for children. They're human-centered lessons of courage and compassion, and that is the quiet power of picture books. And it doesn't have to end in childhood. It begins here. And our future is created by what we continue to read.
So we hope that this invites people on our campus and beyond to reconnect with reading. In a world filled with constant noise, reading offers space to slow down and think. And we can all play a role. So as families, educators, librarians, and leaders, and all of us in this community, maybe it starts with just picking up a book ourselves and rediscovering what reading can be. Thank you.